their last session.
Alright, so again, quite conscious of time, pushed a bit of it. Again, echoing the words of David, a lot of the stuff we'll see today, a lot of the full pump drafts that we'll present, wouldn't have made it possible that everyone in the group. Again, Big Morgan has helped us out a lot with all that, so the cool pump drafts and stats that we're doing, we owe a lot to him. So Tony initially mentioned it, we're talking about talk joint relationships and looking at it as a potentially predictive marker of injury. And it all came back to this one study back in 2004 where they looked at guys that had a history of injury and they indirectly said that that's going to predict future injury risk linked back to architecture. We took it another step further and we started using ultrasound to do it. So I used 2D ultrasound to scan the biceps longhead. It took me a fair whack of time to actually get any good at it. I spent a lot of time in the dark room of the day grabbing the back of his leg. We don't look at each other much anymore, but we spent a lot of time doing that and eventually we can get some reasonable images from that. This is a longitudinal image taken across from that biceps longhead. We can get some of those markers that we're really keen on getting. The main one to look at is superficial aponeurosis, intermediate aponeurosis. We then determine the distance between those is the muscle thickness of the biceps longhead. We figure out, we find a fascicle of interest that runs across most of that length of the image. We find out what angle it inserts into that intermediate aponeurosis. And using a bit of maths, we can figure out how long the thing is. So the whole basis of the stuff that I've done has been based around this whole concept of muscle fascicle length. As Tony went on towards the start, that this fascicle length might somehow augment our propensity for muscle damage, and if we have shorter or longer muscle fascicle length, it might change our risk of injury accordingly. So we based around this whole hypothesis that maybe individuals with injury history were possessive of shorter muscle fascicle lengths, and as a result, this may potentially increase their risk of injury moving forward. But we'll present a few studies looking at prospective and retrospective views of this and how it can evolve from there. With architecture, we also do it during active contractions, so we do it at rest. This is baseline, they're doing nothing. They can actually do something, and we can actually change the actual orientation of those fascicles. Now, with ultrasound, it's very operator dependent. So like I said, I spent 6 months grabbing Dave's arse to actually get good at it. But it's kind of like it's a progressive thing, it takes a lot of time. And the reliability of these measures is going to be the first question mark raised by most people. So I thought I'd present that first to say that it's actually quite reliable. Again, we're looking at the ICC measures that Tony introduced earlier and percent typical error. Again, ICC, the closer it is to 1, it means the more reproducible these measures are. And we just got 20 blokes into the lab 3 days in a row and scanned them 3 days in a row. We can see that obviously closer to 1, we're quite reproducible with our measure. Muscle thickness, nation angle, and fascicle length. Again, our percent typical error, closer is to 0, means the lower amount of variance we get. And we've obviously got everything here below about 4%, which is good for us. So it means that it's alright, this is during rest, and then while we're contracting as well, it's pretty comparable again. So it's reliable data within a certain range, and so we can kind of move forward from there. So we got the same kind of unilateral injury model that Tony's presented previously. We had guys that have had 1 bad leg and 1 good leg, and a bunch of guys that have had injury before ever. And we compared the bad leg to every other leg that everyone else had. So we have control group, guys that have never had injury before, and we're comparing the left versus right leg. Again, we've got fascicle length on the y-axis here, x-axis we've got contraction intensity, 0% being rest, and also we've graded up sorts of photos of different intensities. We see left versus right leg, guys that haven't had injury history, no difference. Whereas guys that have had injury history on that previously injured leg, so that bad leg, they were possessive of shorter muscle fascicle lengths across that contraction intensity spectrum. So this kind of flags to us that maybe there's something going on here. And the main issue that we don't know is that was this the cause or the result of injury? So we're going to go through a bit more in depth about how we look at this. One interesting thing that came out of this is Dave loves this and he sleeps with this. 29. This is all the 16 injured guys, so they all had one bad leg, this is one good leg. We're looking at the measure of asymmetry. So if they're dot here on the graph to the right, they're actually possessive of shorter muscle fascicle lengths on their injured leg. The dot is to the left, they're possessive of shorter muscle fascicle lengths on their uninjured leg. So we can see here that all 16 guys are actually possessive of, within a range of error, shorter muscle fascicle lengths on that previously injured limb. And that, as Dave likes to hammer home a fair bit, it's the only real measure so far that we've had that kind of shows us the strength. We have guys get rehab effectively, they're strong. Their previously injured leg is actually stronger than the contralateral uninjured leg because of the way they've been rehabbed. But this is the only measure so far that we've had this kind of level of reliability and this kind of turnout. To kind of back it up a bit, I actually don't know who these guys are when I'm analysing the images, so I'm in blinded to all the analysis, so I can't pick it out and change it automatically because it's good for my PhD. I actually then, Dave goes through, changes their names to Robert and Russell, whoever knows they are, and then I analyse it, give it back to him, and then he gives me the numbers back. So through that process, I'm actually blinded to who actually I'm analysing in front of me, so it's quite a reliable process. So we came back to that question, is it before or after the injury? So we now know the guys that had a history of injury have got shorter muscle fascicle lengths. But we don't know if that was before or after the actual fact. So we went on and in the same study that they presented with the A-League guys for the strength, we actually got 8 teams that would like us to scan them. 1 team didn't let us do the strength stuff, so we didn't include them for that kind of perspective. But we had 8 teams that allowed us to do the ultrasound measures, both at rest and during active contractions. So it gave us 152 players in total. Again, we collected the same variables, age, height, weight, previous injury history, again, ACL stuff, as well as hamstring stuff, as well as still tracking them throughout the season. Obviously, the season's got 3 rounds left to go in Australia, so we'll wrap it up in the coming weeks. Methods, our main side of interest, we can see here's that posterior thigh again. It's all biceps femoris bone, that image, thigh image, and it's nothing to do with the site of injury. So the site of injury for us is obviously something we're looking at in the future, but for us we're really concerned and concentrate on this systematic or the systemic change or maladaptation of injury, potential increased risk of injury. So we pick a site that's the easiest image, give us the most reliable image, and then we look at that across the full spectrum. Again, we get that image from the biceps femoris, get our main variables, the distance between the two, we make the thickness of the muscle, the angle at which it inserts, we determine the patient angle, and using some maths, we figure out how long the actual fascicle is accordingly. Again, during all analysis, every scan that I've done, I'll be blinded to who's who, so Dave has to do all that work. Stat stuff, again, it's the same process that Dave introduced with the Nordic strength test and perspective stuff. So we use that rock curve to determine our relative risk. And now looking at interaction effects, instead of using strength, we're using fascicle length. So looking at people that have shorter or longer muscle fascicles instead of being weaker or stronger. So it's a similar kind of comparison. So for the guys in the scan, we had 24 injuries so far. We had an email just before I left, so we only got 25. That gives about 83% biceps stem. Again, the majority of our injuries are carrying that muscle, which is scan, which is good, for me anyway. Again, we've got that steer operator characteristic determined cut point. Again, it's not indicative of halfway of the sampling group, it's pretty much that best predictive value. So you can consider these guys on the left here possessing short muscle fascicle lengths, and the guys here on the right possessing long muscle fascicle lengths or longer. You can see the frequency being greater in those that have shorter muscle fascicle lengths compared to those that have longer. And this increases their risk of injury throughout the season 4 times more than those that have longer muscle fascicle lengths. It's quite an important measure for us to consider as well moving forward. In regards to imbalance stuff, again, we're looking at those same relative risk cutoffs and the same kind of arbitrary 10%, 15%, and 20%. Again, these aren't significant at all, so again, they might clinically significant, but our stats tell us these aren't significant difference in regards to between them and balance. It looks to be like absolute muscle fascicle length being relatively short, and the the beginning of pre-season in Australian soccer, increases your risk moving forward. But now looking at those interaction stuff, so the really cool graphs that Morgs gives us. So again, we look at those guys that have had no history of injury. You get y-axis up the top, certain get injured, down the bottom, won't get injured. And then you go on the left here, short muscle fascicle lengths, and as you move your way across, getting longer lengths here. No history of injury and short muscle fascicle lengths, you can consider yourself relatively alright. As you increase muscle fascicle length, you protect yourself a bit more. If you've had a history of injury again, if you're short, and you've had a previous injury of history with your muscle fascicle length, your risk of injury is much greater than those that haven't. But if you move yourself down and create longer and longer muscle fascicle lengths beyond that cut point, we can almost offset that risk of injury again in these soccer boys. Similar story to what we saw with the strength stuff, but now we're also looking at the muscle fascicle length version of it all. Again, we look at the interaction between age as well. So we've got our younger guys, so in and out, again, 10, 25, 50, 75, 90% of the actual sample. So younger guys, again, it doesn't matter really what fascicle length you are, you kind of safe either way. And as you get older, and again progressively get older and older, you can actually almost have a large amount of older guys that have shorter muscle fascicle lengths that went on to get injured this season, to kind of help the story a bit. But again, as you move from left to right across that x-axis, if you're possessed of short muscle fascicle lengths and you're old, your risk of injury is much greater. So if you again are older and you keep progressing towards that right-hand side of the graph, you can again almost offset that risk of injury by having a muscle fascicle length approximately 12 centimeters or more. So again, it gives us another kind of string to our bow. We've got the strength stuff, but now we're kind of considering that maybe the strength stuff can be as important, but we now need to consider the actual structure of the muscle and how that may adapt and change and increase risk of injury moving forward. Yes, obviously, a pretty great story. So we didn't know, no one had ever really considered muscle fascicle length before. And again, we had that model which Tony made, and we got presented in that article, where we had that reduced muscle fascicle length and how it might increase that risk of injury or propensity to muscle damage moving forward. So now we've got that considerable factor that muscle fascicle length might increase the risk of injury as well. And we consider it a modifiable risk factor, and it's a very modifiable thing. You can get a bigger muscle, you can also change the size of the muscle, you can also change how the architecture is orientated. And that can be offset and allows us to change our, reduce the risk of injury associated with being old and having a previous injury as well. But the most interesting interaction that we've got so far that with Morgs, spending some dark nights in Wales, he put together our fascicle length data and then our strength data, and then try to figure out what kind of interactions exist. Because we've obviously all got the strength stuff, and then combine on if you're old, your risk of injury is greater, if you're stronger, so on and so forth. But how does that interact with muscle fascicle length and structure? So we chucked it all together and tried to figure out what interaction exists between these two modifiable risk factors. So again, we've got that same probability of hamstring injury occurring on the y-axis, yet certain being 1, not happening at all, being 0. X-axis is still fascicle length, but now, instead of being old or having a previous injury history, it's actually how strong you are. So here we've got 100 newtons being our Nordic force, and as we progress up, we're going to have different lines indicating different strength cut points. So if you're weak and you're possessed of short muscle fascicle length, your risk of injury is going to be through the roof. But what's actually quite interesting, so if you're relatively weak, you can actually offset a large amount of injury risk associated with being weak by possessing long muscle fascicle lengths. The downside of doing that, you've obviously got to do some strength training to get longer muscle fascicle lengths. So this risk of injury can be offset a bit again by getting older and getting stronger. And again, to an extent, if you can get above 500 newtons, being short muscle fascicle length and being long, you can kind of again give yourself that safety net. The story doesn't change, it's still the same story, be strong, and then you kind of give yourself that safety, that bit of buffer, a bit of insurance. But you can also then augment and change and shift that fascicle length and give yourself a bit more of a padding, a bit more of a buffer. And that's what we're doing. So we tick that off. We know that exists before the fact and also after the fact as well. But the common question we get asked, and it's surprising despite how much the learned individuals we deal with, is can you change fascicle? People deal with it, you can go back to your first year anatomy in uni and you forget all about it. But it became this point, like, well, people keep asking us, can we change it? So we thought, well, we might as well see if we can change it. So, we got 28 blokes who spent 6 weeks in the lab with me. Dave was one of them. We split them in half. So 14 did concentric training only on the dynamometer, and 14 did eccentric training on the dynamometer. So it's all in a seated position, an isotonic dynamometer through 90 degrees of knee flexion, so it's actually quite a long length when you get out to full extension. We're training 3 times a week, or around about 3 times a week. First week we gave them 2 times to ease into it. Trained for 6 weeks, testing at the start, testing at the end for strength, but we tested their muscle fascicle length at the start, after 2 weeks, after 3 weeks, after 6 weeks. Then we gave them 4 weeks off to go back and do whatever else they were doing, and we tested them again after 4 weeks of potentially being detrained by having that stimulus. Our architecture, like I said, was assessed at those 5 different time points. Again, we made those interesting comparisons to see how it changed across that time point as well after doing nothing for 4 weeks. So again, y-axis, we've got fascicle length, so how long they are, and looking at baseline being that first point there. As we move across, we've got 14, 21, 42 days at the end of the study, and then after 4 weeks of doing nothing. The line at the top, we've got the guys that train eccentrically, the line down the bottom, we've got the guys that train concentrically. The interesting fact is that after 6 weeks of concentric on training on the dynamometer, the fascicle length actually dropped by approximately 13%. The most of this drop actually occurred within that first 2 weeks. So whether it is within the first 3 or 4 sessions or whether it is after the whole 2 weeks, that major drop occurred in that first 2 weeks. Opposite occurred in the eccentric training guys. The guys that were training eccentrically for 6 weeks bumped up by 14%. And again, the same story existed. That massive jump mainly occurred after that 2 weeks of heavy eccentric resistance training. The first 2 weeks weren't really heavy volumes, it was about 4 sets of 6, 2 or 3 times a week. But as we progressed throughout the study, we went to 5 sets of 6, 5 sets of 8, eventually 6 sets of 8, and Dave walked around in a circle for a long period of time. Here then was happy to get 4 weeks off. We can see the guys that had 4 weeks off and did the concentric training, came back and their fascicle length actually didn't change at all. It was negligible, wasn't significantly changed. It was much shorter than what they saw at baseline, and yet after doing nothing for 4 weeks it stayed at that same kind of point. So that stimulus was potent enough to drop them down, but once you take it away, they're kind of enough to kind of get by. Whereas the eccentric guys, it's quite interesting the fact that you do eccentric training for 6 weeks, and you go away and have a good off season, have a few parties in Spain, whatever you got to do. You come back and report the pre-season. Your actual fascicle length, whatever you've done throughout the whole season, that nice strength program you put in place, and nice periodization, actually goes to shit after doing nothing for 4 weeks in Spain. So it's quite a, I think it's a supportive factor. The off-season program gives you a lot of support and help. But again, also once you do your pre-season program, you get into your season. And we see it a lot in Australia as guys that don't want to induce damage during the season as well. Or saunas have players who injured it. The fact that they do it all in pre-season, once the season starts, they don't actually do any more. They come into that maintenance phase and they don't kind of progress any further. Kind of supporting that, if we consider that fascicle length is going to increase risk of injury potentially if you play soccer in Australia, doing nothing for 4 weeks is going to actually give you reverse everything you've done for the last 6 weeks. So something pretty important to consider that. We now know that we can change market fascicle lengths despite that's a surprising concept that we can't. So for my conclusions, I think after this slide I'll pass back to Dave to wrap it up. So reductions in muscle fascicle length or short muscle fascicle length are associated with an increase in injury risk. Those increased muscle fascicle length confer some benefit for those that have had a history of injury or are old. But again, it's population-specific. My stuff is, again, more self-reported in Australia. Comparative somewhat to some guys over here. So obviously the standard of sport is different. I know if we can do some eccentric training, we can actually have that stimulus for increasing muscle fascicle length, which is quite supportive as well. Once you take that stimulus away, it becomes quite important to really consider that. Dave will cover the rest of it. We'll wrap it up.
I think that's pretty much it from us, and I'll ask Tone to pop up if people have got some questions for any of us. But just very quickly, a few declarations and also acknowledgements as well. Tony and myself are listed as co-inventors on a patent for the Nordic hamstring device, which I think is always important to acknowledge. But then, on extension to that, we've actually got somebody from the company with us here today, Performance Laurie, in the blue shirt here, who's travelling around with us to chat to people who are actually working at the coalface. Obviously, you guys are going to have a chance to go around and have a bit of a play with the Nordic hamstring device later today if you haven't already had that opportunity. But Laurie's really keen to hear from anyone who's working in elite sport about what sort of data you're interested in getting, how you want to collect that data, how you database, all those sort of things. So, if at any stage you have any questions related to that, we do the science, send anything, Laurie does all the other side of things. So if you have anything that's unscience related, please feel free to ask Laurie. But we also have a great deal of help and support from so many clubs and teams in Australia as well. So whether it's the A-League, outside competition, Super Rugby, the AFL, Queensland Academy of Sport, which helps a lot with Matty Horn's work, as well as University of Queensland and the National Imaging Facility that Tony spoke about out there at UQ as well as QUT, who are pretty important in getting us some funding to do some of the studies related to the Nordic hamstring device. So we certainly are grateful for the assistance from all those people. Thank you, John.
If you have any questions to ask, just feel free to.
Yeah. Can I ask Ryan, I think it is probably. Do you think just doing concentric training on previously uninjured players would increase their risk of injury? Only.
I think if you're using just purely fascicle length as your marker of injury risk, then the evidence is pretty supportive of if you do concentric training, it's going to shorten it. There might be some other offset benefits to make collision adaptation, tendon change, who knows, but purely just fascicle length on its own, it might, obviously that early stage rehab stuff's quite tricky, especially due to those devices. I know Tony's probably better versed in answering that than I am, but I think that's a bit more tactical as how you implement that early stage rehab and stuff.
And just one more, what's your thoughts on why biceps fem 80% all the time? Or well, not just you, anyone?
Yeah, well, that might be better versed in it all.
I mean, there's probably a few lines of evidence that suggest that they have slightly different functions during high-speed running. So there's some of the biomech modelling stuff that shows that biceps fem lengthens more than the other hamstrings. So you'd assume that if it's a strain injury, that increases in primary strain might have some influence there. The architectural features and differences between them as well. Semitendinosis is long fusiform, so longer fascicles, will be better able to deal with rapid lengthening, whereas biceps fem, which has to lengthen the most, is a little bit chunkier.
Yeah, it lengthens what, 2-3% more, is that what people
say?
Yeah,
so I mean, if you have a look at the feeling of the height shot stuff, biceps fem is a 10% increase from position of upright stance. Semimembranosis, which has probably got the shortest fascicles out of all of them, goes 7.5%. So biceps fem is probably not geared necessarily to do the job that it needs to do so well. But I think some of the stuff that Ryan's shown about the risk that fascicle length can have to injury and the ability that you can adapt that probably means that it becomes better able to tolerate that. And I think the eccentrically induced muscle damage or damage tolerance that Tony spoke about before as well, I think is a really important factor, because we think of hamstring strains as occurring acutely, but they're probably a sequence or series of events that lead up to any injury incidents that cause or result in that. So it's probably a little bit too specific to look at just the injury mechanism at the time, because there's so many other factors that probably play in the lead up there as well.
Thank you.
Have you looked at race in relation to this?
I'm not sure if we took it in the soccer study, but we certainly did take it in the AFL study. And I think it's one that is probably nice to throw in the future. There's certainly one study that shows that native Australians or Aboriginals are at an increased risk of injury without any very good mechanistic understanding of what that might be the case. But did Matty take into the rugby league stuff, Tony? Anything to do with
No, I believe we did.
or ethnicity? So,
The issue with the A-League stuff is that most of our boys, the way that the A-League structures, you're only allowed to have 4 foreign players per 10. So there's a lot of positives that are pretty anglo with the origins. So it's kind of going to be, from the sample size and stats perspective, we're going to have a low amount of guys that actually got the region.
The other one I've got is you showed on one of the graphs, I think it was in Tony's presentation, about the 2 different sort of approaches to the Nordic fall. The guy who falls quickly or the guy who falls quite slowly, and they reflect a similar sort of newtonage, if you like, that term. Is there any difference in the relative risk of injury of the 2 approaches or training effects that we should be aware of?
Well, we don't know those yet, and certainly recognising that there's such diversity is the first step in working out what you might do with that next. I personally think that falling a fraction faster, there's a number of factors there that appeal to me about being able to fall a little faster. The most obvious of which from today was that you could actually generate a little bit more tension, assuming you're fairly strong to start with. But no, we've not had any opportunity to look further at that and whether or not that influences injury rates.
So just on that sort of stuff, what sort of importance do you put on the technique of the Nordic drop? Because obviously there's a lot of ones do shear to extension. Are you mainly looking at the force, or how are you controlling that? Or
look, like everyone, we try and mimic with instruction the full extent to which people will bastardise the technique, if you like, because you do see guys who just want to fall fairly slowly and they'll just hike at the hips. With our device, if we get people who are flexed too heavily at the hip, they're robbing themselves because they just don't have the lever against which to work. So I actually say to people, I want you, when you're as low as you can be as tall as you can be. So if, for example, we're close to a wall, I want to tell people to put their forehead through the wall rather than tuck up too much. But we'll always see a degree of hip flexion. And in fact, if you look at the positions people get into just before they touch the ground on a Nordic, it's actually a longer hamstring position than a lot of people think because it's quite a flexed hip. And I think that whilst we might like a more strictly controlled environment, like I often wondered early on, should we brace somehow the upper body, the trunk and the hip? You know, I just imagined all sorts of stupid sort of splint-like devices you could put on the upper body, but I think they'd all be daft. Ultimately, as a training exercise, I think flexing the hip more is a real positive. So I just tend to say, look, be as long and strong as you can at the bottom, but don't worry myself too much about it.
Can I ask one more? Any other thoughts on why the Nordics are so successful with re-injury with the biceps fem, and then 80% of the biceps fem can, you know, we touched on it, but why it only activates compared to semi-tend, relatively minor.
I suppose one thing to consider, if we do look at the EMG data, even though medial hamstring EMG is through the roof, the lateral hamstring activation is still very good by comparison with all those other exercises because it's a truly supramaximal task. And so if we looked at absolute activation of the biceps femoris, it's actually not so bad, but it's not a highly selective activator, of course, of the laterals. So I tend to think it's possibly doing enough, and it may well be that you don't have to have that muscle as, you know, the primary target. There's arguments that semitendinosus, being activated very heavily, may be adapting in a very positive way so as to protect its agonist. And Eric Vitrow and his group did that. What was the title of that study again? Teammates or competitors. You know, I think they're onto something there. It's a confusing paper, to be honest. I haven't got my head across it yet, which is not to say there's anything bad about it. Eric told me about it. I went and read it. and I still haven't got my head around it, what's going on. But there might be something quite interesting between those two muscles. You can see in one of our studies when guys had injured bicep fem, long head, there was inhibition in the semitendinosus during running. So there's some links there between those muscles, and perhaps they are working as teammates.
Yeah. Is there anything in turning heels in or out when you do Nordics in terms of?
Yeah, like we can alter.
Promoting activation.
We can certainly alter medial and lateral activation that way, according to our MRI evidence. So there's something to it that you can try and fiddle with,
Okay, thanks.
Is there any other exercises you would say for increasing fascicle length? Obviously, you just that example within that. Any other ones?
The only example we do have is that dynamometry training. We pivoted that because it was the longest one we could get them to. In the lab, we could control all of the variables, give them slow or fast contractions as well. Tony's just started a study up in Queensland with Maddie, looking at Nordic versus back extension, and 10 weeks of doing that training. I flew up, scanned them all, and we're going to see how they change across that period, so that we're quite going to see what happens with Nordics across 10 weeks.
The general principle is if you go longer in training, you should get better adaptations. However, our hip extension will be concentric eccentric. Our Nordics are eccentric only. And so I think that even though the range of motion or the excursion is better for the hip extension, it's also concentric eccentric, which might have a mixed, if you look at Ryan's eccentric and concentric having opposite effects. You put them together with most strength training, and I think you cancel it out to some extent. So Nordics, despite being through a modest range of motion, might still have a better effect on fascicle length than people think. Because, the muscle range of motion is too short, the movement's too slow, it's not functional, there's all sorts of reasons not to like it, but they're theoretical reasons, and we've got lots of evidence that there's still some value in that test or in that exercise.
Great, thank you once again. That's on behalf of the group. I'd just like to say thanks for a very informative lecture. We'll take the meeting downstairs now, and as I said, if anyone wants to grab any of our stuff and wants to have a wander around, or the last demonstration kit, you can do. If you feel brave enough to get on it, feel free to get on it. We've got our nice bags for anybody who's on them. Alright, thanks.